If your truck breaks down out there, you're alone. But sometimes, you're not. Story 1. The rig hummed, a constant low growl against the vast, empty canvas of the West Texas night. I was on the graveyard shift, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., out on pad 7 with my partner Sal. Just us, a couple of $1 million of steel, and miles of nothing but scrub brush and the occasional pump jack silhouetted against a sky so black it swallowed light whole. It gets lonely out there. Too lonely, sometimes. The first oddity happened a few weeks in. I was doing my rounds, checking pressure gauges, when I saw it. A shadow, tall and gaunt, flit between two storage tanks about 50 yards off. It was too quick, too fluid to be a coyote or even a deer. I froze, squinting into the gloom, but it was gone. Wind playing tricks, I muttered to myself, the diesel fumes thick in my nose. Sal just grunted when I mentioned it. Sleep deprivation, man. Get some coffee. But it didn't stop there. A few nights later, we were huddled in the doghouse, escaping a sudden dust storm. The wind shrieked like something alive, rattling the corrugated walls. Suddenly, a distinct tap-tap-tap started on the roof, right above us. Not the random clatter of debris, but rhythmic, like knuckles on a door. Sal and I looked at each other, eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically small. It stopped as abruptly as it began. We waited, tense, for minutes before Sal finally forced himself to open the door, flashlight sweeping the roof. Nothing. Just the sand settling. The worst night, though, was last Tuesday. It was dead calm, not a breath of wind. I was on the catwalk, monitoring a flow line, when I heard it, a whisper, right behind my ear. It wasn't English, not any language I recognized, but it was words. Cold, dry, like rustling leaves. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but there was nobody. Just the endless dark, the distant glow of the flare stack painting the horizon a sickly orange. I practically ran back to the doghouse, shaking. Sal was already there, pale as a ghost. "You hear that?" he choked out, barely above a whisper. "Out by the generator? Sounded like a woman humming." I shook my head, unable to speak. His eyes met mine, and we both knew. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't sleep deprivation. There was something else out there, sharing our desolate patch of Oilfield. Something that watched from the dark, learned our routines, and whispered our fears back to us. We finished the shift in near silence, our flashlights sweeping the perimeter every 5 minutes. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. When the relief crew finally pulled up at dawn, the first rays of sunlight felt like a blessing from heaven. Sal and I just nodded at each other, a silent understanding. We never talked about it again, not really. But every night since, when the sun dips below the horizon and the rig lights sputter to life, I feel it. That cold, watchful presence. And I know, deep down, it's still out there, waiting for the dark. Story 2. The isolation out on the rigs is a different kind of empty. It's not peaceful. It's predatory. We were working the night shift in the Permian Basin, maybe 90 miles from the nearest town that was more than a glorified truck stop. Out there, under the high black sky, the only light comes from the sodium lamps bolted to the derricks, casting sickly orange pools that barely keep the vast, swallowing darkness at bay. You spend 12 hours listening to the pumps and the generator hum, and your mind starts to do strange things. I was partnered with a guy named Jake. We were running preventive maintenance on a satellite manifold cluster, about 4 miles from the main camp. The wind was a solid, constant thing, the kind that vibrates through the bone and makes every shadow jitter. We were near the end of our shift, around 3 a.m. I was tightening a valve cover. Jake was checking pressures, and the air was dead cold. Then the wind stopped. Just cut out. The silence hit us like a pressure wave. All that was left was the low, grinding rhythm of the distant central pump, and it sounded impossibly loud in the sudden lack of wind noise. "Hear that?" Jake muttered, his wrench hand pausing mid-turn. I nodded, not looking up. "The wind died." "No," he said, his voice dropping. "I hear something else." I straightened up and scanned the perimeter. Our work light only reached about 30 feet. Beyond that was pure, starless black. That's when I heard it too. It wasn't a mechanical sound, and it definitely wasn't the wind returning. It was a rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the direction of the abandoned storage tank we were near. It sounded heavy, wet, and deliberate, like something large walking across dried mud, but too slow for a person. "Coyote, maybe?" I offered, knowing damn well it wasn't. "Coyotes don't weigh 300 pounds, Jake whispered. He slowly reached into the cab of the truck and grabbed his pipe wrench. The thumping stopped directly behind the rusted, squat tank. Everything went silent again, but this time, the silence was expectant. We stood there, two tired men under harsh yellow light, waiting for whatever was on the other side of that rusted metal wall to move. Then came the voice. It wasn't a yell, nor a shout for help. It was just a sound, a drawn-out deep resonance that seemed to happen inside my chest cavity rather than in the air. It sounded like someone trying to speak through a vast, echoing cave. The words stretched and warped, too low to be human. Jake's eyes were locked on the top curve of the tank. "Did you hear that?" I swallowed, my mouth dry. Sounded like low-frequency feedback. No, that wasn't equipment. As we stared, a shape shifted into the corner of the light, maybe 50 feet away, where the scrub brush met the deep shadow. It was tall, taller than the utility truck, and thin. It didn't stride or walk. It just leaned into the light radius for a half-second. It was dark, darker than the night around it, an absolute void of color. And then it was gone. Not running, but simply removed, like a pencil sketch erased cleanly from the page. We didn't need to discuss it. We tossed our tools into the truck bed, slammed the doors, and I floored it until we reached the main lease road. We drove back to the main camp and clocked out. We never talked about the sound or the thing we saw standing in the darkness. But for the rest of the time I worked that rig, every time the wind died down, I felt like the night was holding its breath to listen to us breathing. And I never drove out to a satellite pump again without checking the rearview mirror for that unnatural, deliberate shape lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Story 3. The generator hummed, a low, constant growl against the vast, oppressive silence of the West Texas night. Miles of nothing but scrub brush, mesquite, and the skeletal outlines of pumping units stretched out under a sky so black and star-dusted it felt like a heavy blanket. My name's Mark. For the last 4 years, I've been pulling night shifts on various outfits, mostly out here in the Permian. You get used to the solitude, the wind that never stops, the metallic tang of crude. What you don't get used to, or at least you shouldn't, is the feeling that you're not alone. It started subtly, like most things out here. A flicker in the periphery, a shadow that wasn't there a second ago, gone when you turned your head. We'd chalk it up to sleep deprivation, the way the floodlights threw weird shapes, or just the wind playing tricks with the dust. "Too much coffee, not enough sleep, boys," old Earl would grunt, wiping grease from his brow. But then Earl started double-checking the rig locks, even though he swore he'd just done it minutes before. One night, I was out by the flare stack, checking gauges. The roar of the burning gas was a steady thrum, but underneath it, I swore I heard something else. A whisper, like dry leaves skittering, right beside my ear. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but there was nothing. Just the endless empty desert, and the yellow flame dancing against the ink black. My heart was hammering. I told myself it was the wind, always the damn wind. Then there was the incident with the toolbox. Manny, our youngest hand, a nervous kid from El Paso, claimed he'd set his wrenches on the tailgate of the work truck. Came back 5 minutes later, and they were neatly arranged on the ground, 10 feet away, almost like someone had placed them there. "The wind, Manny," Earl said, but his eyes were darting around too. Manny just shook his head, white-faced. "There ain't no damn wind strong enough to do that, Earl." A week later, it was my turn. I was on a lone pumping unit, miles from anyone, doing a routine check. The pump was grinding its rhythmic motion, a giant metal insect in the moonlight. I climbed the ladder to check a valve. As I leaned over, a cold breath ghosted across the back of my neck. I froze. It wasn't the wind. This was distinct, like someone standing right behind me, exhaling. And then, a low, guttural growl, just loud enough to cut through the pump's thrum. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too hungry. I scrambled down that ladder faster than I ever have, my boots clanging like church bells in the quiet. I didn't look back, just jumped in the truck, slammed it into gear, and didn't slow down until I saw the distant lights of our main site. I never told anyone what I heard that night. Nobody does. You learn quickly that out here, under these endless, indifferent stars, some things are best left unsaid. But when the wind howls a little too loud, or a shadow stretches a little too long, every one of us knows. We just keep our eyes on our work, our backs to the rig, and pray that whatever it is out there, stays out there, in the desolate dark.